making a love offering after the session tonight. Dr. McMurtry is beginning here on a 2-month tour that will keep him from his wife for 2 months. He leaves here tomorrow, headed for Pennsylvania. He's got to go out to Reno, I think, maybe California. He's got a lot of places to go before he gets home. And so we want to give him a good love offering and let him know we appreciate his sacrifice to come and share with us. We're going to have a word of prayer, and we're going to ask the Lord to bless as he shares with us. Would you bow with us? Father, thank you for today. It's been a pleasant day. Thank you for helping us to rise early to realize that you planned this day as a special event in our lives. Lord, thank you for showing up and watching over us and guiding us and refreshing us with your handiwork. That we come to your house to seek your face and to learn more about the truth revealed in your word. And so I pray for Dr. Grady that you bless as he shares tonight. I pray, oh God, you anoint his lips and help him, Lord, to speak from a heart of fire for you. I pray, God, that what's said will not just be heard and appreciated, but passed on to others who need to know the truth. Lord, have your way. Do your work tonight. We'll praise you in Jesus' name.
Amen. Well, good evening.
They get better.
Yeah, but they're not there yet. This is our 6th and final opportunity this week. So let's end tonight on a crescendo, okay? I mean, this is the evening the Lord hath made. You shall rejoice in it. Amen? Amen. Good evening. Good evening. Much better. See, I told you they could do better. Yes. We're going to turn off the lights up here, but I think we've solved the little video problem that we had last night if you were here. I hope that you did enjoy last night, though, even if we had a few dark slides. But I think we got it all taken care of. Tonight, we're going to talk about the topic of people and dinosaurs did. Capital D, capital I, capital D, did live together. And we're going to take a look at what evolutionists say. We're going to take a look at the evidence. And we're going to see that, first of all, people and dinosaurs did live together. And as a special little treat tonight, we're going to talk about fire-breathing dragons. Just kind of to pique your interest. But in starting about talking about dinosaurs and people living together, I would like to share with you a comment by one of the world's great recent evolutionists. This comes from Dr. Ernst Mayr. Now, Dr. Ernst Mayr died at 95. He was the scientist emeritus of the American Education Association and the mentor of Dr. Stephen Jay Gould at Harvard, a preeminent evolutionist of his time. He said this: creationists have stated that humans and dinosaurs were contemporaries in time. Were this momentous statement true, the names of its discoverers would thunder down the corridors of time as individuals had made one of the most outstanding discoveries of the 20th century. Well, apparently my name is going to thunder down the corridors of time. Hello? Let's start taking a look at the evidence. Now, we must start with the final and ultimate authority. That's in the Bible. Dinosaurs, the word is not found in the Bible because the word was not invented until 1841 by Sir Richard Owen in England. So before 1841, the word dinosaur doesn't exist, and that's why you don't find it in the Bible. But we do have 12 references to dinosaurs or their relatives. And when I say are their relatives, I'm talking about creatures that people think of living at the same time as the dinosaurs. But there are 12 references to them in the Bible. So first of all, let's start taking a little look. Where would you expect to find the first reference to dinosaurs in the Bible? Genesis. Hey, good. Oh, no, Genesis. Excellent. And in the book of Genesis, where do you think you'd find the first reference?
When you put the animals on here?
Close. We'll kind of accept that. Yeah, let's take a little look. 12 references to dinosaurs and their relatives in the Old Testament. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, or day 5, excuse me, verses 1, 21 through 23. And there, in your Bibles, you might read things like God created the feathered bird. But God does not classify animals the same way that we do. We have an excellent system of classification for animals and plants developed by a Swedish Christian creation-believing scientist in the 1700s whose name was Linnaeus Carolinus. And it's an excellent system. but it's not God's system. You with me? And so God in the Hebrew language lumps things together differently than we do. The word that's translated there, flying birds or feathered birds, if that's your translation, actually means any animal. We're not talking about insects. We're talking about animals that fly, which includes birds, of course, but it also includes the reptiles that fly and mammals that fly, like bats. And so all three were created on day 5, the animals that fly through the air and all of the animals that live in the ocean. Now, this would include the great marine reptiles, and later we'll talk about Leviathan. Leviathan is a great marine reptile. So God creates the things that fly through the air and those that fly, swim through the water on day 5, but on day 6, in verses 24 and 25, God makes all of the land animals. And if you have a reference in your Bible to the beasts of the field or beasts of the earth, that is a direct reference to dinosaurs. I would also like to point out to you that in Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30, please read it, because God says he created all of the animals and people initially as vegetarians. That's a very important reference, although I myself am eternally grateful to God for Genesis 9:3, because after the flood he does modify the law, and in Genesis 9:3 he says, now you shall eat meat. Hello? Now, if you've been to a meal with me, you know that I'm a carnivore. Meat eater. Hello? Pastor can give you testimony later. But it is important to note that all the creatures were created as vegetarians. How many of you know that 22 years ago, evolutionists at the highest level reclassified T-Rexes, velociraptors, and oviraptors as vegetarians? They were not meat eaters. As a matter of fact, on tonight's presentation, we have the video there. Now, yeah, you can go to YouTube, but if you want to get a good version and full length, you've got to get our materials out here on the table. But on the one of tonight's presentation, I have a second presentation, and it's on sharp claws, sharp teeth do not a meat eater make. And in there, I do give the reference that they've been reclassified as vegetarians. But sharp claws and sharp teeth do not indicate the food that an animal eats. Many vegetarians have sharp claws and sharp teeth. And so simply because T-Rexes had sharp claws and sharp teeth does not make them a meat eater. That's an evolutionary fairy tale that you've got to get over. God tells us they were created as vegetarians, which means that, you could have had a pet T-Rex if you'd lived before the flood. She lit up. Yeah, you could have had a pet T-Rex until it got too big to keep in the house. Hey, you don't keep a 30-foot-long T-Rex in the house. Hello? You remember that song about where the buffalo roam? Anyway, also, though, where is the next reference to dinosaurs in the Bible? Now, first of all, remember, 1,656 years after creation, we have the flood of Noah, a total, complete, global flood of the earth. In Genesis, it says that the highest piece of land before the flood was covered by at least 21.5 feet of water. If you go to Psalm 104, verse 6, it says the water was standing above the mountains. This is not a local flood, it is a global flood. And because of this, God wants to preserve the animal and the 8 righteous people. And so remember that while Noah built the ark, God is the one who sent him the animals, correct? And it says he sent him 1 pair of each unclean kind. Now, dinosaurs are reptiles. Reptiles are unclean, biblically speaking. And therefore, he would have sent him 1 pair of each dinosaur kind. That's along with the other reptiles. Now, there are only 50 to 55 kinds of dinosaurs. And you would only need 100 to 110 animals to get all the dinosaurs on the ark you would need. And, of course, God also sent 3.5 pairs. It says by sevens, but in Hebrew what that means is 4 males and 3 females of the clean. The 4th male was used in the burnt offering by Noah after the flood in thanksgiving for surviving the flood. And this left 3 pairs of clean animals to reproduce after their kind, correct? But there were dinosaurs on the ark. Now, they were not full grown. They were juveniles. Because remember, the purpose was to start to live as long as possible and reproduce for as long as possible after the flood to repopulate the earth, correct? But there were dinosaurs on the ark, and they are mentioned 11 times, or their relatives, after the flood. Now, Pastor would be correct about the next reference. Let's take a little look at Job. In Job 40, verses 15 to 18, God is speaking, not Job. And God says there, behold now behemoth. The word behemoth is not English. It is a Hebrew word that's not translated into English. It's only spelled in English characters. But if we were to translate that word, it would mean beast of beasts. Beast of beasts. Does that make it sound kind of big? You'll also notice in verse 15, God says it's a vegetarian. He eats grass like an ox. And it says that God created him with Adam. Actually, they were created on the same day. Dinosaurs were created on day 6. Adam and Eve were created on day 6. They're just the last things to be created. And so you'll take a look at verse 16. Big, strong, powerful animal. Verse 17, an animal that has a tail the size of a cedar tree. This is clearly the description of a large, air-breathing, land-dwelling dinosaur. And verse 18, when it says there that this creature has, tubes like bronze of iron and bones that are also like bars of iron, that may sound very poetic. You know, bones are like tubes of bronze, bars of iron, sounds poetic. But actually, it's a very scientific statement. Think with me for a moment. This tells us that this creature is a reptile. Many people say, oh, this is an elephant, mastodon, rhinoceros, hippopotamus, some big animal we know of in recent times. But no, this is a reptile. Reptiles have hollow bones. Their bones are tubes. The same thing with, of course, birds. And so that description tells us that this is a reptile. It is not a mammal. You know, mammals have solid bones, but reptiles and birds have hollow bones. And then, of course, let's take a little look. Again, Job. Now, chapter 41, verse 1 and on, is a description of a large marine reptile. But leviathans are also mentioned in Job chapter 3, Psalm 74, 104, and in Isaiah 27:1. Now, let's think about this for a second. Job lived at 2000 B.C. At that time, Abraham was a young man. So Job and Abraham are contemporaries to a certain extent. But Job is 4,000 years ago. We can place him pretty accurately. He's living 350 years after the flood. The book of Psalms was completed over a long period of time. Now, 77 of the Psalms were written by King David. We know exactly when they were written. But there are Psalms that we can't date. However, we can date Isaiah. Isaiah lived from 700 to 750 B.C. He was alive during the time of King Hezekiah, and we know exactly when he lived, and let's call it 2,700 years ago. Now, do you consider Isaiah to be a reliable witness? That was not terribly convincing. Do you consider Isaiah to be a reliable witness? Yes. Ah, that's better. And he says there were still leviathans living in the ocean only 2,700 years ago. And then, if we go to Psalm 91, verse 13, specifically in the King James, but there are other translations that actually correctly translate the word dragon. Now, before 1841, the word dinosaur doesn't exist. What's the most common word for dinosaur then before 1841? It's just simply the word dragon. That's just the ancient word for dinosaur. Now, there were a couple of other words. Another one was lindworm, and I'm going to show you another one as well, but the most popular word was always dragon. Also then, twice in Isaiah, only 2,700 years ago, in chapter 14, chapter 30, he says he saw flying dragons, flying reptiles, flying serpents. So again, that's only 2,700 years ago. But evolutionists say that no human ever saw a live dinosaur. Do you kind of get the feeling the Bible contradicts that? Ooh, good. Now, the final reference I'm going to show you here, the 12th reference, is a little obscure. If you'll open your Bibles and go to Micah, the prophet Micah, chapter 1, verse 8, in the King James, it does correctly translate the word tanim as dragon, but some other translations, you will find the word jackal. Now, when you think of the word jackal, you tend to think of a dog-like creature living in Africa. But you have to remember that the word jackal, like many other words, changes meaning over time. And it is based on the exact same word used in Genesis for dinosaurs. And so here are 12 references to dinosaurs or their relatives mentioned in the Old Testament. Now, some of you might be aware of this. I know Pastor would be. Have you ever heard of the Septuagint translation of the Bible? Now, the Septuagint was done by Jews in Egypt trying to translate Hebrew into Greek for the Greek-speaking people. And I would think that, well, they probably know how to translate Hebrew into Greek, wouldn't you think? Right? Uh-huh. Now, again, the Septuagint is never to be considered as totally authoritative by any means, but I find it kind of interesting. I hope you will too. In the Septuagint, remember the story of Jonah? Your English translation said he was swallowed by a great fish or a great whale. Is that correct? It's not what they translated in the Septuagint. They used the word in Greek for great marine reptile, a leviathan. Find that a little interesting? Yeah, I do too. Now, again, this is our biblical references. But what other reliable historic and historians who mentioned dinosaurs? Well, first of all, the Old Testament was completed about 400 BC. At that time, there's a very important Greek historian. His name is Herodotus. He is so important, he is called the father of history. And in one of his books, he writes about winged serpents, flying reptiles. The description that he gives us down here sounds very much like the small flying reptile we know of called Rhamphorhynchus. I am glad to say that the spelling test on how to do that will be given after I leave. But the description is very much like that of Rhamphorhynchus, and he's only living 2,400 years ago. Is that correct? Now, we also have other reliable historians who mention flying serpents. How many of you might remember a guy named Aristotle? Well, Aristotle mentioned them, again, 2,300 years ago. Also, the Roman statesman Cicero mentioned them 2,100 years ago. And we have 4 more references here all the way into the 12th century. All of them talk about flying reptiles, flying serpents, flying dragons. Then if we go back in time, again, remember Herodotus is about 2,400 years ago, but 100 years after Herodotus, we have another very important Greek man. His name is Alexander the Great. Anybody here remember Alexander the Great? Oh, come on, folks. If you don't remember him, he'd be really upset. Hello? That's why he called himself the Great, right? Well, he is leading his troops into northwest India in the early 300s BC, and they saw dragons along the way. Now, if you are going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must read the first century Christian historian, the Apostle Luke. But if you want to be a serious student of the Bible, you must also read the first century non-Christian historian, Flavius Josephus. And 2,000 years ago, Flavius Josephus talks about flying reptiles, flying serpents. But he gives us an interesting little detail. He says they lived in the ground but flew through the air. He wrote that 2,000 years ago. It has been less than 20 years since we actually found that, well, we actually found fossil dinosaur burrows, where small dinosaurs did dig in the ground and live in burrows in the ground. But we've known that for less than 20 years scientifically, but he writes about it accurately 2,000 years ago. Kind of gives credibility to his writings, doesn't it? At the same time that Flavius Josephus is writing his very famous histories, we have a Roman naturalist. His name is Pliny the Elder. Now, a naturalist is what we might think of as a pre-scientist. You know, interested in the study of nature, but not with scientific tools, etc. But Pliny the Elder, now he died at the eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79. He wanted to study volcanoes, and he got too close. Don't tell me science can't be dangerous. Hello? But 2 years before he perished at the eruption of Vesuvius, he wrote a book, and he talked about how dragons and elephants fought each other in India. Now, he never was in India. He learned about this secondhand. I want you to know that. However, 200 years later, we have another Roman naturalist whose name is Flavius Philostratus. And he did go to India, and he does write the following. He says the whole of India is girt, meaning full of, filled with, dragons of enormous size. For not only the marshes are full of them, but the mountains as well, and there is not a single ridge without one. Now, the marsh kind are sluggish in their habits and are about 40 to 45 foot long. And please notice, and they have no crest standing up on their heads. Now, let's think about this. Why would he write, and these have no crest on their heads? Could only be because he knew there were dinosaurs that did have a crest. Is that right? And again, I want you to remember this crest on the head, because you're going to see it again later. Now, I cannot begin to show you all the references to people and dinosaurs living together. For example, you might remember St. George and the Dragon. Well, that's a real story. That's not a mythology. That is a real story. St. George lived in the early 300s AD, and he was a dragon slayer. Now, why? Why would you have a dragon slayer? Well, first of all, remember, God created them as vegetarians. Is that right? Ah. Now, what if you were a farmer, and a 30-foot-long dinosaur who is a vegetarian walks into the neighborhood and starts eating your crops? You're going to, take offense at that, aren't you? It's an economic thing. You don't mind the animal, but you mind it eating your crops. And so you would hire the local dragon slayer. They're also mentioned in the epic poetry of England, such as in Beowulf and other epic ancient poetry. But I can't show you all these references. I would kind of move along, though. How many of you remember a guy named Marco Polo? Come on, folks. You remember Marco Polo? Well, he left Europe in 1271 and walked to China. In the spring of 1273, he enters into western China, and there he describes a large two-legged dinosaur. He says it is a serpent, therefore a reptile. It's about 30 feet long, has a big head full of big, sharp teeth, and looks something like that. Oh dear, here it goes again. Apparently, that wasn't the answer. Anyway, I don't know what it is, but hopefully we'll figure it out one day. The fact of the matter, though, he accurately describes a large two-legged dinosaur 700 years ago in China. I think he would also say that in China and Southeast Asia, the art and literature is full of dragons, correct? Now, mind you, most of it's mythology, but remember that mythology always starts in reality. Mythology always starts in reality. And we're going to talk more about China and dinosaurs a little later. But how about 1611? In that very famous year, we have the record of the Emperor of China having to hire a royal dragon caregiver or feeder. You can translate it either way. And that's only 400 years ago. Let's go back. This is going back to Europe. The year is 1449. Now, this comes from the Chronicles of Canterbury Cathedral, one of the most ancient and most important cathedrals of Christendom. And in the chronicle, they wrote that they saw two fire-breathing dragons engaged in a fierce hour-long struggle. One was black, but the other was reddish and spotted. And that was written only 550, or you want to say 575 years ago. Do you get the idea that people really did see dinosaurs? Starting to come alive for you? Well, let's keep going. Again, this is from England. The year is 1484. William Caxton, the first man in England to use a printing press with movable type. He did not print Bibles, but he did print Bible verses on this press. But he also published a book in 1484 talking about how dinosaurs lived in Italy at that time. Now, this is 1484. Only 90 years later, we have a legitimate scientist, a very important man in the history of science. He's an Italian scientist called Ulysses Aldrovandus. Why is he so important? You see, he is the first man in human history to acquire a large building, collect over 7,000 samples from nature, put them on display in the first natural history museum the world has ever known. And in 1572, only 90 years later, he had an encounter with a small dinosaur. Now, it was only a baby. It was only 2 foot long, but it was a baby dinosaur. Now, he painted a painting of what it looked like. Obviously, he didn't have a camera. But remember that Latin is the language of science 500 years ago, and above his painting, he writes a description of the creature, and the very first word is dragon. It's obviously a reptile. You can see the scales, has a long tail, long, thin neck, very small head, has a forked tongue like a snake, correct? It is clearly a reptile, but do you see anything else there that's of particular note? Excuse me? Well, it has legs, but it's only got two in the front, right? Ah, so it's missing two in the back. And you are going to say, well, that's just mythology. But it's not mythology, it's reality. Let me show you a live reptile today that lives down in the Baja Peninsula of Mexico. It's a reptile with only two legs in the front. We also have a species of reptile today that has only two legs in the back. It has a very sharp pointed nose because it pushes its way through the ground like a mole. And legs in the front would be a disadvantage if you were living like that. And it has only two legs in the back. This is reality. Again, let's go back to England, only this time the year is 1496. Now, in 1496, the Christian bishop of the Cathedral of Carlisle, his name Richard Bell, died. Now, Carlisle Cathedral is one of the most northerly cathedrals in England. It is right smack up against the southern border of Scotland. I was there about 8 years ago. And, well, Richard Bell died in 1496, as was the custom of England in those days. He was buried in the floor of the cathedral. You can see his tomb right here. Do we have anybody here tonight who's interested in music ministry? Any music ministry? Okay, well, one there. Two. Okay. Well, you two might be interested to know. He's buried in the middle of the choir. Apparently he liked music. But English cathedrals are well known for their brass plaques. And on the cover of his tomb here, we see these brass plaques, correct? Now there's a rectangular plate down here. You can't see it, I realize that. But what I want to do is I want to magnify it so that you can see it. Because on top of the Christian bishop's tomb, it looks like that. Here we clearly see two long-necked dinosaurs, four-legged, with necks entwined, which I would point out is a common animal attribute. But you'll notice carefully, it's not the same species. It's two different species. Notice the spikes on the tail of this one, but not that one, correct? Now this was done 500 years ago, correct? That is enough information that we actually know the species of dinosaur. The spikes in the tail tell us. Now, the one on the right is just our best guess because of size, but nonetheless, here we see two dinosaurs, necks entwined, correct? Do you get the idea that people and dinosaurs did live together? Again, I can't talk about all of the history of dinosaurs and people living together, but let's take a look at this one because this is a very important reference. You might want to write it down. This is 1883 from the Scientific American magazine. The Scientific American magazine is the house organ of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. It is devoted 154% to the teaching of evolution. But in 1883, in their own evolutionary publication, they record a small armored dinosaur in Bolivia. Now, I just returned 3 weeks ago from Bolivia. But when an evolutionist tells you they saw a small armored dinosaur in Bolivia in 1883, don't you think you ought to pay attention to it? It kind of dismantles the idea that there's 65 to 70 million years between people and dinosaurs, doesn't it? And so we have, in fact, written history of people and dinosaurs living together. And what about physical evidence? Do we have physical evidence of dinosaurs and people living together? Well, I think you probably know me well enough by now after 4 days that I wouldn't ask a question like that unless, of course, we had, yeah. So let's start taking a look. But again, I want to start with a statement by an evolutionist. Now, this comes from NOVA, from PBS, which is a 110% evolution organization, and they said this: dinosaur footprints side by side with humans. Finding them would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. Now, I've got to tell you, I think that that's a darn right good, honest statement. I don't care if it was made by an evolutionist. That's a good statement. So let's just see if we can find footprints of people and dinosaurs together. What do you say? Well, let's do this. Now, first of all, footprints of dinosaurs and people have been found in Russia, Brazil, Peru, Texas, South Carolina, Utah, Turkmenistan, and Arizona. The citations are at the bottom. And let me show you a piece of rock from Utah. The piece of rock I'm about to show you, really two pieces, but they fit together. These two pieces of rock have been authenticated by evolutionists as being Cambrian shale, and supposedly 490 to 540 million supposed years old. Now, let me show you the picture. So this is supposed to be 500 million year old rock according to evolutionists. And do not ask me why. I don't know. I would not have done it this way. But for some reason, the rock on the bottom is the top, and the rock on the top is actually the bottom. But these are sedimentary rock, dried out mud. And those layers between here, for instance, in Carthage, are a great example. As you're driving from here to Carthage, you'll notice all those layers of limestone rock, many of them quite flat. But if you'll take a good look, you'll notice that some of them actually do undulate, and you can find some discrepancies if you're careful to look. But I want you to think about this. This is one layer of mud, then another layer of mud, then another layer of mud. It's dried out into hard rock. Now, when you have a situation like that, particularly in certain shales, like the Green River shales, you can take the rock and you can literally just kind of jiggle it a little and pull it open like a book. What it has is what's called a bedding plane. This is when one layer beds on top of another. And they don't connect. They just bed on top of each other, and you can kind of just pull them a little bit, and they'll pop open and open up like a book. You with me? And that's exactly what we have here. This top piece was simply, well, removed from that bottom piece there. But I wonder, do you see anything that looks familiar to you? Well, it's not a footprint. I don't see any toes. Well, actually, it's a sandal or moccasin. It's a men's 9.5 size sandal or moccasin. But notice also, right here and right there are two baby trilobites. According to trilobites, evolutionists say they died, became extinct 500 million years ago, which is why the rock is dated at 500 million years old. And so what you're looking at is a men's foot inside a 9.5 size sock, moccasin or sandal, crushing to death two baby trilobites that have not existed in at least 500 million years. How y'all doing? I will now show you the same two pieces of rock in a way that actually is easier to see. Here you see them again, side by side, but much easier to see. This fits into that. Now the toe on the bottom was broken off before it was found, unfortunately not found. But you can clearly see the parallel sides and nicely rounded heel. But here you can see the toe, correct? You can also see a trilobite fossil there and a trilobite fossil there. And you can see how that fits the indentation left here and this one there. But you might also notice one other thing. Notice how the heel is worn more on one side than the other, correct? That is a typical human print. Animals don't do that. Bears don't do that, for example. And so it shows it is human and supposedly 500 million years old. Now that being true, if it were true, that means that this print was made by a human being for 300 million years before dinosaurs evolved into existence according to evolutionists. I think I see a problem. But let's continue. Now, this is a picture from the Havasupai Indian Reservation, the west end of the Grand Canyon. If you have been to the Grand Canyon, you've been to the national park. When you go to the national park, that's the middle of the canyon and the east end. But the west end belongs to the Havasupai Indians. You have to pay an extra fee to go over there. It is worth the trip if you ever got that way. But why is it so important? Well, here in this wall in the Havasupai Canyon, you see ancient Indian pictographs. Now, these are not modern forgeries. They have what's called desert patina, and that means they are old, and they are not recent. Now, I myself have dual citizenship. We've not talked about that, but I am a citizen of the United States, of course. But I'm also a citizen of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma with full voting rights. And I want you to think about native Indian art for just a moment. And I can say this because I are one, okay? That means you don't have to worry about it. Think about the difference of the Central and South American Indians compared to the North American Indians. In Central and South America, they did massive sculptures. They had massive cities, built pyramids would rival that of Egypt, India, China. They had language, art, excellent mathematics. As a matter of fact, they understood zero before Europeans. They were also very good astronomers. They had sports, etc. They were very sophisticated. Are you with me? However, in North America, that was not the case. I think I know why, but that was not the case. North American Indians didn't do that. North American Indians only did two kinds of art: geometrics and what they saw. Take a look at these pictographs. On the wall, for example, up here, we see two stick men. I mean, I'm a scientist. That's the kind of art I do right there. But on the wall, we also have elephants and ibex and a dinosaur. Now, that's a two-legged dinosaur. We can't identify what species. It could be a T-Rex, Allosaurus, Admontosaurus. I don't know. But it's the picture of a two-legged dinosaur. And I want to show you just two sentences, really, from a scientific report. The research was done in the fall of 1924, but published in January of 1925. The paper is Discoveries Relating to Prehistoric Man by the Dahomey Scientific Expedition in the Havasupai Canyon, northern Arizona. Again, published in January 25, but the research done in the fall of 24. Now, I want to read a couple sentences with you, and I want you to know I really, really want to meet this guy. I hope he became a Christian, I hope he's in heaven, and I really, really want to meet him. And I think after I show you what he wrote, you might want to meet him too. In the report, he said this: the fact that some prehistoric man made a pictograph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon upsets completely all of our theories regarding the antiquity of man. Amen. But that's not the sentence that I really like. I really like the next sentence. He said, facts are stubborn and immutable things. If theories do not square with the facts, then the theories must change, the facts remain. I like that guy. Facts are stubborn and immutable things. And if your theory doesn't fit with the facts, your theory is wrong. Right? Yeah, I like this guy. But let's take a look at other pictographs from the American West and Southwest. For example, here in Utah, we see what appears to be an Apatosaurus or a Diplodocus or maybe some other four-legged dinosaur, but we can clearly see a long tail, neck, four legs, and large body, correct? And this, again, is ancient. It has desert patina. And let's continue to take a look. Further down the wall, by the way, there is a human and a goat on the same wall. How about here in Utah? Now, here is a large four-legged dinosaur and attributed to the Anasazi. The Anasazi, the word means the ancient ones, but supposedly 700 to 1600 years ago when they did this, right? Now, I realize you may not see it very well, but again, here's a picture of the dinosaur, and here's one of our Creation Scientist friends sitting next to it. But I want you to be able to see it very well. I realize in this photograph it doesn't show up very well. I realize that. Gesundheit. Let's take a look. First of all, where did we find it? You see the circle here. This is the Kachina Natural Bridge, the Natural Bridges National Monument in Utah, and it's here under this very large arch, well protected from what little weather there is out there. But let's take a little look at it, a little closer, okay? Now here you can make out the dinosaur, but up here is a very large male human, apparently. And they're right next to each other, correct? Well, let me show you a picture of the dinosaur without any touching up whatsoever. There it is, head, neck, body, legs, tail. But now let me do Photoshop so that you can see it better. This is a touched up photo, and it looks like that. Does that help you to see it? But it has heavy desert patina on it. And this comes from the north shore of Lake Superior. This comes from native Canadian Indians. And on the wall here, now I have photoshopped it a little bit here just so you can kind of see it, but there are 4 images there you can make out, correct? And further down the wall, we find horses and people and other characters here, okay? Now, I'm going to show you it much better and a little heavier Photoshop. It looks like this. Now, as a Native American Indian myself, these could be a representation of ripples on the lake, but I think they're snakes. Now, I can't prove it. You make up your own mind about this, okay? But to me, these appear to be snakes, but they could just be water ripples. Over here on the left, again, I would say that this is a canoe with people sitting in it, but we have no documentation. We cannot be sure, and I do not want you to say that I said that they were, okay? But here we have a creature. It has horns and frills down the back and tail. Is that correct? Well, that's an ankylosaur. That's an ankylosaurus. That is an armored dinosaur by definition, the kind we were talking about in Bolivia. Well, let's keep going. Now, this is an original black and white photograph of the Ishtar Gate in Babylon as it was found during the original archaeological investigation between 1899 and 1917. This was built by Nebuchadnezzar II, whose armies destroyed the first temple of Solomon. Now, the Ishtar Gate itself was built about 575 BC, after the destruction of Jerusalem. However, here you see the Ishtar Gate. Now, you can see that there's something on the front of the gate, right? Some images there. Now, let me show you another original black and white photograph, and you can clearly see. What do we have here? Well, we have oxen, we have lions, and we have dragons. Now, please let us not argue as to whether this is right or wrong. It was over 100 years ago, right? But 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when Europeans went to the Middle East and they were doing early archaeological things, they would sometimes bring those artifacts home and put them on display in museums, correct? So let's not argue about whether it was right or not, but they did. I would like to show you a picture of one of the original dragons. It was removed from the gate, taken to a museum in East Germany, and during the time of communism was very little seen. But today, of course, it is readily available. And the gate is actually done in color. You will see the ancient stone very easily, and you will see the modern stone placed around it in a matrix to keep it in place so it doesn't fall apart. This is what one of the original dragons looked like. I would like you to carefully notice the shape and features of this creature. It has a cylinder-like body, 4 long, thin legs, huge claws, long, thin tail, long, thin neck, and notice the neck gets smaller as you go out with a very small head. It has a snake-like tongue, but it has a crest on top of its head. Is that correct? And this is a representation of scales. Clearly, this is a reptile, correct? And it has a crest on the top of its head. I would like you to burn this image into your brain because you're going to see this image again. Hello? And it was called a dragon. Here, what you see in the upper left-hand corner here, this is a cylinder seal. Now, this is used in Job 38 by God when he speaks and says, the earth is round and rotates like a cylinder seal. Now, how many of you know that if you have a modern cell phone, computer, laptop, pad, whatever, you got to have virus protection? You all do know that you do have to have virus protection, correct? Right? Well, I quote Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. We've needed virus protection for millennia. Think about it for a moment. What if you were a king 3,000 years ago, and you wanted to send a message to another king, and you wanted to make sure that message was not corrupted? You want to make sure it arrives just like you said, because if it's changed, you could cause a war. Is that correct? So back 3,000 years ago, what did you do? You took a fresh cylinder of clay, a hole through the middle so you could put a spindle in it and roll it, and you etched the message in the negative. Then you fired the clay. Once it was fired, it could not be changed without knowing it. And then a courier put it in a pouch, took it to the other king, and when they got there, what did they do? They simply put a fresh piece of rectangular-shaped clay, took the cylinder seal, rolled it against the fresh clay, and you saw the positive of the message. That is as illustrated below. In this case, now I saw this in the Louvre in Paris 8 years ago, and here it is not a message. Here is a work of art. Is that correct? And let's take a look at the art. First of all, flying above here, we have birds of prey, probably hawks. But I've noticed these animals down below. Cylinder-shaped body, long, thin tail, long, thin neck, small head, crest, and the necks are entwined. Is that correct? I had mentioned earlier that this is a common animal behavior, but does this look familiar to you? Does look a little familiar, huh? Well, again, this is a common animal behavior. Animals that have long necks and long noses do this. It's for familial relationship or for courting. Here's just a couple of examples, pictures I've taken in Africa, and they really do that. Again, it's family contact, family relationship, or in courting. And well, let's take a look at another piece of art. This is a Roman mosaic, 1,900 years old, and here I see creatures with necks entwined, etc. But in this case, please notice, that's not a terrestrial picture, that's a marine picture. Notice the fish. And the animals that have their necks entwined with the very small heads, these are not legs, those are flippers. That is a leviathan. Hello? Oh, only 1,900 years ago. Well, let's keep looking. Now, this is a mural from the House of the Physician in Pompeii. Pompeii is a fabulous place. You have no idea. It is huge. I mean, huge. And perfectly preserved for us by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79. Every month, we are cleaning out new rooms, new stores, new streets. We're finding new paintings, new murals every month. And they will keep doing that for many, many years. It is a huge place. And in this mural, well, let's see, what do we have? In the upper right-hand corner, we have a warship with one row of oars. That's called a monorine, but it is a Roman or Greek warship. Being in Pompeii, we'll assume it's a Roman warship. Now, a little over and down to the left here, we have a boat with some men in it. On the ground in front of the boat, we have two men that are either dead or dying, and here we have a hippopotamus. It is clearly a hippopotamus, the size of the tail, the dentition, etc., and this man is trying to kill it with a spear. Now, the hippo is the single most dangerous animal in Africa. It isn't the lion. They're way back on the list. The hippo and the Cape buffalo are the two most dangerous animals in Africa. Now, here we have this hippo, but let's take a look here down at the bottom. We have three men here with what appear to be ropes or reins, and here's a creature with a man on the back of the creature, but please notice, you might say that that was a Nile crocodile, but it obviously is not a Nile crocodile, because notice these dermal spines going down the back here. Now, what is a dermal spine? Dermal means skin, and a dermal spine means a frill or spine-looking thing, but there's no bone. It's just flesh. It's like the top of a shark or the top of a porpoise or something like that. No bone. It's just flesh. We didn't know until 1992 that some dinosaurs had dermal spines because there's no bone. And it had to wait until we found the impressions of them that we knew that some dinosaurs had dermal spines. But here, accurately depicted, we have dermal spines. Is that correct? And, well, that is a dinosaur. Now, how do I know it's a dinosaur? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say something. How many of you, parents, grandparents, have been forced to watch any of the Jurassic Park movies? Hello? Yes, thank you. I want you to remember that those movies are not science. They're not science fiction. They're not science fantasy. What are the Jurassic Park movies? Well, number one, they are entertainment. We'll give them that. But they are also pure propaganda. The fourth movie was so bad that even evolutionists said you shouldn't go see it. Now, how bad does it have to be for an evolutionist to say you shouldn't go see it? Hello? But the movies are not even consistent with the theory they were made to support. There's all kinds of inconsistencies with the theory and what they show you in the movie. It's just entertainment and pure propaganda. However, you've seen dinosaurs being depicted in the Jurassic Park movies or any number of other movies, correct? Now, remember, not all reptiles are dinosaurs, but all dinosaurs are reptiles. That's called set theory, but not all reptiles are dinosaurs. Now, there are 10 scientific major differences between dinosaurs and other reptiles. You only need to remember one. This will make it really simple and really easy, okay? There's 10 major differences, but you do have to remember only one. Think about those movies. You've seen dinosaurs. You've seen skeletons in museums. You've seen photographs of them, etc., correct? Think about all the dinosaurs that you've ever seen, movie, fossil skeletons, whatever. Whether they have 2 legs or 4 legs, the legs go straight down, under the body. The same as a cat, a dog, a horse, a cow. The legs go straight down. But other reptiles, alligators, crocodiles, lizards, the legs go out like this, isn't that right? And they walk like this. And the stomach is very close to the ground. And monitor lizards, etc., correct? But true dinosaurs, 2 or 4 legs, doesn't matter. The legs go straight down under the body. So think with me for a moment. Here we have dermal spines, and notice the legs go straight down. That is a dinosaur. Well, let's keep going. Now, I'm telling you, there's something about the overdriving of the white. I think that's what it is. But this is a piece of ivory used in magical medicine in Egypt. Now, I disagree with the dates. I don't think it's quite as old as they say, but what's 700 years between friends, right? Right? So I'm not worried about the age. What I want you to look at is what's on this piece of ivory, and certainly 3,000 years old or thereabouts. Now, over on the left here, we have the sacred scarab, the dung beetle, the beetle that supposedly pushed the sun across the sky every day, associated with the god Amun-Ra. Above the beetle, we have the head of an alligator and a double-headed sphinx. Over here we have a snake, a frog, a lion. This is a mythological creature, but common in Egyptian mythology. The head of another crocodile, another lion, and this is a cobra. But I wondered if you noticed this one right here. Notice this animal with cylinder body, 4 long, thin legs, long, thin tail, long, thin neck, small head, correct? Kind of looks familiar, doesn't it? Come on, guys, you can say yes. And if you're not going to say yes, at least blink your eyes, will you? Now, I'm going to show you something else. Again, this is from Egypt. This is called a stele, a stone stele. Now, steles were used for various purposes. Some of the times you find them with history written on them. In this particular case, this is a votive offering to a god. So this is a gift to a god to keep the god off your back. Hello? Remember that in Eastern religion, you give gods money, fruit, tools. You're trying to buy them off. Because in the Eastern religions, the gods are simply superhuman. They're just like us. They're just bigger. And if you don't give them what they want, they're going to come down and hurt you. Hello? Now, this stone stele, somebody would buy this, have an artist cut it and buy it, and then they would give it to the god to keep the god off their back, right? Now, in this particular case, I would call this a crude representation. I think this is just a novice artist. He's just getting going. It's not very good quality. But I noticed what's on the stele. First of all, at the bottom here is actually a pretty good desert hare, H-A-R-E, rabbit with long ears. Other animals here, but I noticed in the middle we have, well, 2 cylinder-shaped bodies, 4 long legs, long thin tail, long thin neck, small head, right? Well, now let's take a look at an artist who's been at it for a while. This guy is apprenticed for a while, and he's a much better craftsman, and the stele looks like this. Now, I think you'll agree it's better quality, correct? And down here at the bottom, we see lions hunting ibex. But here in the middle, I see 2 creatures with cylinder-like bodies, 4 long legs, long tail, long thin neck, small head. It kind of looks something like what we've seen before. Is that correct? Well, now let me show you a master artist. This is a top-end artist right here. It looks like this. Oh, excuse me. That. My finger got a little fast on the trigger here. Bad finger, no donut. Here we see a really good quality master artist here. This was a votive offering to the sun god Amun-Ra. They say it's 3,200 years old. Again, I would disagree with that. It couldn't possibly be that old, but I'd be perfectly willing to agree on 4,000. No problem at all. But let's see what we have here. At the bottom, we have a Cape buffalo that has wounded or killed a man down here. Up here, we see 2 mythological creatures based on Cape buffalo. In this panel right here, here is Pharaoh, his general, his soldiers, and these are decapitated prisoners. But in the panel from here to here, I see 2 animals with cylinder-like bodies, long, thin necks, small heads, etc. And there's a human on each side with a rope leash around the neck of each one of them. Is that correct? Now, I've shown you all of these to simply say you might think that this just is mythological and they were just copying each other and so forth. But no, this is real. This is the skeleton, a fossil skeleton of a dinosaur we found in northern Italy. Do you remember that book that said there were dinosaurs in northern Italy in 1484? Well, this is one we found in northern Italy. Please notice, it's 20 foot long, but the neck is half the length of the body. Get the idea that people and dinosaurs really did see each other? Well, let's keep going. Now, these are figurines found in Chinese tombs, and if you'll notice, this one looks very much like a Protoceratops. This one down here, the things on it, that's a representation for scales, but it has claws, long tail, and actually has 2 crests on this particular one, correct? But the one I really like is this one over here. Now, here's a 2-legged dinosaur. First of all, we notice dermal spine, correct? And this is a representation of scale with claws, and the head has a crest. Is that correct? I really like that one. I think that's really good, personally. But that's from from China. And how many of you ever went to a Chinese restaurant placement that looks something like that? Looks familiar? Well, I've mentioned I have an interesting kind of a background, but I was born in San Francisco in Chinatown. And, well, take a look. This is the Chinese zodiac. It's not 12 months, it's 12 years. And each year is represented by a specific animal, correct? Now, I actually was born in the year of the dog. I've never had a problem with that, but that's the year I was born. But please tell me, 11 of the animals are still alive today when they were picked to be on the zodiac. Is that correct? What's the one animal that we don't think is alive today? Well, that's the dragon. But please tell me, if the other 11 were real when the zodiac came into existence, why wasn't the dragon real? And let's go to Mexico. Now, what I'm about to show you are just a few of 33,500 fired clay figurines. They are attributed to the pre-classical Indian culture in Mexico. That's 1,800 to 2,800 years ago, according to evolutionists. Certainly pre-Columbian. Would you agree? I mean, right? Now, these 33,500 were found between 1945 and 1952 in Mexico. And please notice, remember those dermal spines? I told you, We didn't know some dinosaurs had them until 1992, correct? Now, I'm only going to show you a picture of just a few of them, but I think it's sufficient. Take a look. These are just some of the fired clay figurines that were found. And here's a four-legged dinosaur with no dermal spines, but here's a four-legged dinosaur with dermal spines. Is that correct? And here are two-legged dinosaurs with dermal spines, correct? But take a look here. Here we see a man hugging his pet dinosaur. And ladies, I think you will agree, he has just recently been to the hairdresser. Is that correct? Oh, come on, ladies. Look at those lines of curls like that. And he's got a smile on his face. He's happy, right? I think he's hugging his pet dinosaur. Now, he might be wrestling him, but I think he's petting it. Hello? Y'all familiar with that term, wrestling? Yeah, I thought so. And but down here, take a look at this. Here's a dinosaur with no dermal spines and a guy in the back, but I think the guy's in trouble. That dinosaur's got his tail around his neck and that guy's tongue sticking out. I think he's losing the fight, personally. So do you get the idea that people and dinosaurs really did live together? Hello?
Yes.
One person only. Well, with that in mind, we're almost finished. Now, this is the frieze on the Church of St. Louis of the French in Rome. It was cut in the 1500s. Now, obviously, this is not ancient. It's only 500 years old. But the reason I use it is a representation of a fire-breathing dragon, correct? And it's a nice one. And so, as we close, let's talk about the reality of fire-breathing dragons or not. You know, could it be or could it not be? Well, first of all, I want to make an absolute stipulation. Again, never get your education from the National Geographic, the Learning Channel, Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, or Hollywood. Amen. I'll try that again. Never, ever get your education from the National Geographic, the Learning Channels, the Animal Planet, Discovery Channel, or Hollywood. Amen. And in spite of fire-breathing dragons that are shown in Hollywood movies, no animal can create fire inside its body and then breathe it out. Did you hear that? I stipulate no animal can create fire inside its body and then breathe it out. Are you with me? However, please tell me, if an animal could create fire in front of its face and you saw it happen, wouldn't you say it appears to be breathing fire?
Yes.
Agreed? So if an animal could create fire in front of its face, not breathe it out, but create it in front of its face, then when you saw it, you might say it appeared to be fire breathing, correct? Right? That is an absolute biological reality. That is an absolute biological reality. Think with me for just a moment. Remember that Genesis chapter 1, 29 and 30. God created dinosaurs as vegetarians. Is that correct? Think with me for a moment. We have dinosaurs that are commonly called crested dinosaurs, but this is not flesh. In this case, it's bone, but it's not a horn, it's not a spike or anything like that. This is actually a part of the nose. This is part of the nasal cavity. The air coming in the nose here goes all the way up, turns 180 degrees, comes right back down into the back of the mouth, just like you, only it's a lot longer. You with me? Now, remember that no one creates anything without a purpose. I don't care what it is. You give a man a penknife and a log and he cuts a toothpick, he did it with a purpose, correct? Right. Well, let's think. If God created it, it's got a purpose. Now, why would you need a nose 3 foot long? A good bloodhound with a nose 4 inches long can smell one part out of 1 billion parts. You don't need a nose that long to smell. Are you with me? Well, let's think. What could those long nasal passages actually be for? Well, I mentioned dinosaurs were created as vegetarians. Now, they ate a lot of vegetation. I mean, you think about how much an elephant ate in one day. Dinosaurs, the bigger ones, ate 2, 3 times as much as an elephant each day. And when you digest vegetative material in your stomach under what is called anaerobic conditions, meaning there's no oxygen. Okay, so when you digest vegetation in your stomach, you then, if there's no oxygen, you produce methane, at both ends. I'll just let that sink in. I mean, how many of you know you do not walk up to a cow, lift up the tail, and strike a match? Come on, folks, on a good day, you can get a flame 4 foot long. Hello? And you don't walk up to the front of the cow either and light a match, because if they burp, they're going to get a flame, might burn their lips, certainly scare the cow, and they might trample you to death. Hello? So when you digest vegetative material in your stomach without oxygen, you produce methane, but methane is a fuel, a burnable, flammable gas, right? Now, that is going to be the source of fuel for what appears to be fire-breathing dragons. Again, they don't create fire inside and breathe it out, but they can create fire in front of their mouths. Now, how would they do that? Well, the methane gives them the fuel. And when they are mating or defending themselves, etc., they know how to, and excuse the expression, they know how to burp on command. And I think all of you know that little boys can do that too. But how do you ignite the fuel? That's the question, right? Where the fuel came from, that's easy. But how do you ignite it? Well, I'm going to show you 3 ways you could ignite it. Now, I don't think it's either one of the first 2, but I think we have to be honest and include them, because it's possible. I don't think it's right, but it's possible. So how could you ignite the fuel? Well, first of all, it could be a mechanical mechanism like clicking teeth together, or maybe they slam stones together. After all, there are animals that eat rocks to help in digestion, so they might have had rocks inside, and they could click them together, maybe make a spark. I don't think so, but that's a possibility. I think you've got to include it. What's a second possibility? Well, the second possibility is it could be an electrical mechanism. You know, electric eels are not the only animal that can create an electric circuit. There are electric fish, platypus hunt with electric fields. A large electric eel can take a horse to the ground. But there are creatures that can create an electric field, not just an eel. And I want you to think about something too. When we find the fossil of a dinosaur, now, when we find the fossil, we are finding the bone, but there's no way for us to recreate the chemistry. Now, let's think about this. In that long nasal cavity that goes all the way from the front of the mouth, up and around and back to the back of the mouth, first of all, what if there were, and I just said what if, but what if there were glands that on demand could create an electric current? And when they breathe out, the methane is going to go in front of the mouth, a little bit is going to go through the nose, the electric charge is going to ignite it, and when it comes out the nose, it ignites the major gas, and you have what looks like a fire-breathing dragon. Are you with me? Certainly that is a possibility. However, I don't think that's the right one. I think it's the third one. I think it was a chemical mechanism. You see, every living organism, I don't care whether you're an elephant, all living organisms have some arsenic and some phosphorus. Obviously, too much will kill you, but you have to have trace amounts to live. Every single cell in your body has a tiny amount of arsenic. Now, under the same conditions that produce methane from vegetation that is being digested without oxygen, an anaerobic condition, you will also create arsine and phosphane gas. Now, arsine and diphosphane gas. How many of you know that you have to store phosphorus underwater because otherwise it spontaneously ignites? And maybe some of you are aware of phosphorus ammunitions and so forth, very deadly. But phosphorus exposed to oxygen instantaneously burns. Well, it also is true of arsine gas. Now, think with me. Are any of you aware of something called swamp lights at night? Anybody wear swamp lights at night? The glow in the swamp at night? Aha. Why do you get swamp lights? You don't see it during the day. But at night, what's happening? Remember, swamps have very stagnant water, very low amounts of oxygen. There's vegetation that's fallen into the water, and it is decaying without oxygen, and it is producing methane. It will bubble to the surface. But under the same conditions, you will also get bubbles that come to the surface of arsine and diphosphane gas. And when they pop, on the surface, if there is methane above the water, it will ignite and you'll get swamp lights, swamp glowing here and there. Now, again, think with me. What if you've got a dinosaur that is fighting for its life, defending itself, or fighting over mates, or something like that, but it's agitated? And what if there were glands in the nasal cavity there that would secrete arsine gas or diphosphane gas on demand? And the creature can simply exhale methane. As some of that goes through the nose, it picks up arsine, diphosphane gases. When it comes out the nose and hits oxygen, it will self-ignite. And it will then ignite the methane. This is serious science. No creature can make fire inside and breathe it out. But it is a biological possibility that you can create fire in front of the face and be described as fire breathing. I would point out to you that Leviathan is said to have made smoke, and of course where there's smoke there's fire. And of course, again, remember that Leviathans were created to eat vegetation like kelp forests. Many creatures you don't think are vegetarian are. In that secondary video that I have here, sharp claws do not a meteor make, I have pictures of a great white shark eating kelp. I have a whale shark eating kelp. In Florida, we have a shark that is vegetarian. It's called a bonnethead shark. But it's a vegetable eater. It does also eat shrimp, but it's not after the shrimp. It's eating the seagrass, and the shrimp just happen to be hiding in there and get caught. But it's a vegetarian shark. Many creatures you think of with sharp claws, sharp teeth are vegetarians. And how did T-Rexes eat? Well, think about those little tiny hands with those little tiny claws. They're not real good in a fight, is that right? I mean, they're so small you can't even feed yourself with those things. Hello? How did they actually eat? Well, they took large leaves, palm fronds, banana leaves, and they simply clamped down on them with those sharp, pointed teeth, and then went sideways, stripping the pulp off, leaving the skeleton. And they were vegetarian, and we have ample scientific proof of it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our little session tonight on people and dinosaurs did live together, and you are now convinced and will be able to convince others. Could I get an amen?